Welcome back. In almost every shooting, we eventually see images on Instagram or Facebook of those involved holding an arsenal of guns. But what if before these deadly shootings took place, we were able to use those social media posts to try and get those illegal firearms off the street? That's the idea behind a bill that State Senator Jason Pizzo proposed 2 years ago. That legislation went nowhere because of concerns expressed by both the right and the left. I recently spoke to Pizzo, and we were joined by Ruban, the head of the Miami-Dade NAACP, and Hilton Napoleon, a criminal defense attorney who is also the legal advisor to the nonprofit group Parents of Murdered Kids.
The bill would have allowed for law enforcement to have contact with individuals who are unlawfully possessing firearms.
And what does that contact look like? What would that contact look like?
Well, it could be, preferably, it would be contact away from the home, and then specifically not at 4 a.m. kicking down a door, because it wouldn't be an exception for an arrest warrant. It'd be an exception basically for search. And right now, kids know especially that there's really nothing anyone can do about it. I mean, if my son goes on Facebook right now and says, I'm going to shoot up the school tomorrow, absolutely that qualifies for law enforcement to come get them. However, in some weird perversion of the law or the lack thereof, a kid can load and rack a firearm and we can't do anything about it.
So you propose this is the intent, and you get pushback from both the right and the left, as I understand, which is why your bill went nowhere. You got pushback from the right in what ways, and pushback from the left in what ways? Talk about that.
Most recently, there was, and I think a legitimate concern, that anything that would increase interactions between law enforcement and especially teenagers, Black and brown teenagers, was not to be endorsed, supported, or advanced. So we did well in the Senate advancing it, but on the House side, there was immediate pushback.
So you hear what he's trying to do. When you listen to that, what is your concern? Is it that issue of whatever Jason and the law's intention may be? Is it the concern about the implementation? When that authority, when that additional power is given to police, that concerns you? And where do you draw that line in terms of the risk versus the reward of trying to get that gun out of that house?
So, Jim, yes, I applaud Jason for trying to address the gun violence issue. However, whenever there are any laws on the books, how those laws are implemented in certain communities, particularly in the Black community, it looks a little bit different. And so what we've seen in our community, and we've had a whole year of protests and still deaths after George Floyd by the hand of law enforcement officers, where everything looks like a nail to a hammer. And so, when they go in, the enforcement in our community, the Black community, we are enforced. The law is enforced. In others communities, in Coral Gables or in other communities, more affluent communities, they're policed. And there's a difference when you have enforcement versus policing. Because once they get to the ag battery, the next charge is going to be a gun charge. How do we give them some sort of program and treat those kids to prevent them from escalating to more violent offenses?
So I'm with you on the part where we talk about trying to get them early on so they don't end up in this cycle. What I'm trying to address is the more immediate issue of those who have already crossed that Rubicon, who we've already failed as a society. That kid now has a gun. How do we get those guns out of their hands and off the street? That's the question. And how much authority do we cede to police to do that?
I agree that there needs to be more attention to what's happening on social media, but they are cliques. These are not organized gangs. So you don't have a hierarchy that you're dealing with. Police officers can't go to the Bloods or the Crips and say to the leader, listen, we're concerned about what happened over there in Hialeah or Miami Lakes. You can't do that. You have cliques. I don't know if we have the bandwidth or resources to look at every social media conflict that's happening and judge whether or not this is going to escalate to something that is more violent. So there has to be that prevention thing. There has to be an outlet for parents. Each one of those kids or young adults that are involved in the shooting, they go home to someone. They go home to a parent, they go home to a loved one or that sort of thing. The concern of that parent or that loved one is how that kid will be treated if they were to interface with law enforcement. Some of these parents want to turn the kids in. Some of the parents want to, try to get that kid off the street. Some parents, even before it escalates to the point to where the kid is involved in the violent crime or murder, have made several attempts to engage the criminal justice system. So yeah, it's still a preventative fashion. It's not an intervention. It's still preventative. You're still working on that. Those kids are at the point where they have weapons. At the point of where they have weapons, they are already gone. But the first thing that I suggested is that let's deal with them on that front end to make sure that we can get them out of that stage. And then as far as now, when they're in this place where they're shooting over beefs, they're shooting over financial issues, whatever the case may be, we need to get the family and the community involved. Every community that you see the shooting in, community members knows who the shooters are. And of course they know who the victims are. But every community that you see that shooting in, the community knows who that shooter is. So what do you do to encourage that community to share the information about who that shooter is and get them off the street?
Listen, from my perspective, from dealing with the families and the mothers particularly, they want change. They want results. One of the biggest problems and one of the biggest issues is that the status quo is still there and nothing is happening. I applaud Senator Pizzo for bringing his bill to light because as a person who has prosecuted cases and a person who has defended cases, when you see the tangible evidence, a photograph of a person holding a firearm, that is meaningful in court. That is probable cause to give the police officers to go into the home and search their home and get the guns off the street. And while I agree that there need to be preventative methods, having that tool is a preventative method. I can show you 5, 6, 7, 8 mothers who wish that somebody went into the individual's home that killed their child because there were posts and things on social media that could have been looked upon early on. The biggest problem, however, is that there's no trust in the community. A lot of these people are treated like they are criminals themselves. I have people who are victims of crimes, who are parents of victims of crimes, and they're not treated the way that you would expect them to. I agree with Ruben. The way that someone would be treated in Coral Gables is different than the way that a parent would be treated in Overtown. So the problem is not just the tools. The problem is the attitude that police have in certain communities where people are not treated fairly. And it's a trust issue. If people in these communities where these homicides are occurring trusted the police, believe that the police were going to be there to effectuate change and really make an effort to catch a killer off the street, they will be much more likely to cooperate and support Senator Pizzo's bill. But when police show up and kick in doors at 4 o'clock in the morning, that evades and that erodes the trust that the community have in police officers. And that's the biggest problem to me.
These kids are not gangs. These are not, this is not, criminal sophistication, criminal enterprise. They're loosely affiliated kids, gathered in areas that are low-hanging fruit, really for a number of things that, and I've said this on the Senate floor, I've said this in a courtroom, I've said this on the campaign trail, and I said it at my dinner table. The Pizzo kids, if they're going to smoke a joint, it's probably going to be in the back of someone's house where the cops are not going to arrest them. Okay. But if the Pizzo kids were living in certain neighborhoods, they're on the street corner doing the same thing. That's reality. And what Ruben and I also have spoken about before and agree is that first introduction to the criminal justice system on that small sort of misdemeanor or de minimis charge creates the great divide between probably a kid from Overtown or Liberty City and one of my kids. And that's like, mom and dad have my kid, out of jail immediately. Whereas opposed to a kid who might not be able to come up with the bond money, takes a plea, CTS, raises his right hand because he's cold, tired, afraid, and in a jail cell over at DCJ with 23 real criminals. And he just wants to go home and doesn't realize that when he raises his right hand, it's a plea of convenience that will result in never getting a student loan or a home loan, and therefore exacerbates the cycle. We agree on that. What we don't agree on is when Ruban says that by the time you see a kid on social media with a gun, he's gone. I don't believe that. And I'll tell you, I really don't. And I think what we'll also agree on is the following, is that each one of these kids, and I say kids, and Jim, I think you would agree, and Ruben would agree, you know, we're in our 40s and 50s. So when we say kid, 21, 22, 23.
Right.
And what I mean by that is my kids know that a lot of people care about them, place a tremendous premium on the value of their life and safety. And we have kids, a large group of kids in our community who don't know that, who don't think that the government or the school system or the neighborhood or community leaders really value their life. Ask Hilton the percentage of cases of the mothers he represents and cares for have had closure in their kid's case, their son or daughter killed. What percentage have actually had closure?
Jim, I have to jump in here because I want to make something clear for the record. I never give up on any of my kids or adults. Understand that for the record. I don't care if he has 10 guns around him. Everybody is redeemable in my book. And I want that to be understood. Don't ever misinterpret when I'm saying that I give up on a black man, black child. I
didn't say give up,
woman.
but you said.
I'm just saying that I don't want that perception to be out there.
But Ruben, okay. I listened to everything. And when you said, but by the time it gets to a kid on social media with a gun, he's gone.
Yeah, that doesn't mean I gave up on that kid. If I said that and I have to play the tape back, I don't mean that I'm giving up on the kid. Understand what I'm saying? By the time they have that gun in hand, that means they're closer to using that gun. So just for the record, whether you believe that or not, if they got that gun in their hand, one of the first things you learn on the street is you never pull out a gun unless you're gonna use it.
Plan on using it.
That's one of the first things you learn when you grow up in the inner city neighborhood. So if they got that gun in their hand, they are more likely to use it than not. So Ruben, that's what I meant. But I never give up on mine.
Let me be the interpreter for you. And I know we talked about that before. And let me interpret that. So what he's basically saying is that most kids in the inner city, and the statistics will show this, most of them make it out okay. It's just the things that we see on TV, and there is a big problem. What Ruben is basically saying, for a kid in the inner city to go and have a gun and to post it on social media, he's far, far away than the typical average kid that's already there. So the ones who are out there posting this on social media, they are down that path already. They're not the ones who you see doing other positive things in the community or trying to get their lives together. They're down that path and they have a very, very narrow scope. And it's almost like, have they gone too far already? We need to catch them before they get to the point where they're flashing guns. To answer Senator Pizzo's specific question, most of the mothers in our organization do not have closure. I can talk for hours, probably days, about the reasons why. But at the end of the day, we want closure. They demand closure, and it's not happening.
We'll be right back.